I started feeling really, really nauseous. It seemed very, very overwhelming. And so I started pacing and pacing and pacing, wondering what I just got myself into. But then a sudden jolt of adrenaline hit me. I had two choices. I could either fail miserably, or I could pick myself up and do something about it. So I did. So I sat down at a desk, did the first thing that any true professional would do is I Googled convocation speech. And then I proceeded to write and rehearse, write and rehearse, write and rehearse, up until late into the evening and early into the next day. By 4 o'clock, I was starting to hallucinate. I couldn't think clearly. The only thing that was driving me was some adrenaline that was pumping from my nervousness and my stress. And by 4 o'clock, when you're starting to get hallucinating and you start to feel a little bit stressed or really stressed, your mind can convince you of a lot of things. In my mind, I thought, this is fantastic. I have something that they will absolutely love, right? Worst case scenario, I just demotivate 200 potentially newly minted graduates. So I decided to go to bed. By the way, I actually canceled my next morning client because there's no way I was going to make it. So the next morning I wake up, I continue to practice, and then at 2 o'clock, as I'm looking to book my flight, I receive a phone call. It's the organizers. They pull the plug on the whole thing. The original speaker had changed his mind. He was going to return and actually do the speech. I felt two things. One is a little bit of dejection for a missed opportunity, but that was far less than the huge relief that I felt from all this weight off my chest. I wasn't going to get out in front of the people and probably do something that was really embarrassing to myself. And that is acute stress. There was a high amount of stress, and then it ended. Chronic stress is when you're at that elevated level. The 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock where I was that night, every day, day after day, week after week, month after month, with no release. Your body is running on fumes, and that becomes the precursor to all the ailments and illnesses you read about in the paper. The obesity, the cognitive dysfunction, the heart disease, all that. Because what happens in your mind affects your body. And this segues ourselves into the next story. I used to be in a business group, and every month, this business group would invite a guest speaker to come and give us a presentation on a topic of our choice. Last year, around holiday time, our group leader, in all her wisdom, decided to invite a guest speaker to talk on health. He was a Canadian physician who decided to give us a conversation or speech on stress. Now, it would have been one thing if he just showed up and said, stress is bad for you, you're all going to die. Just using words. That would have been very demoralizing and not very effective. But he chose a different approach. An approach much more powerful than just words. He chose to demonstrate. Now, I don't have the equipment that he had to demonstrate, but let me recount to you exactly what happened so you kind of get an idea of what we learned. Now, it was a beautiful day in Chicago. We're on the 95th floor of the Hancock Tower. To the north, we had a beautiful view of Lakeshore Drive, and to the west, through a giant glass window, we had a great view of Lake Michigan. The conference room that we were in was arranged so that we had 2 long conference tables going down the length of the room, and then at the back of the room, there was one going widthwise across, creating a U-shaped formation. And down the middle, there was a nice long path leading to the front where the speaker, the good doctor, could walk back and forth and speak to everyone. About 15 minutes into the presentation, after his introduction, he grabs he grabs a fold-up chair and a fold-up table, and he places them in the center. Then out of his duffel bag, this is where he grabs the white blood pressure monitor, and he puts it there. And then he asks for volunteers. At this point, a very useful piece of advice that my grandfather once gave me popped into my head. And I'm convinced this is something that he realized as he was about to jump out of a perfectly good airplane over the beaches of Normandy in World War II. And is be wary of what you volunteer for, because you never know what you're just about to get yourself into. And sure enough, the doctor then said, for 1 minute, everybody in this group is going to make fun of you. They're going to ridicule you as much as they possibly can. But what we're going to look for is to see the difference in your blood pressure before the ridicule and after. Thanks, Grandpa. I'm going to keep my hands down for this one. Funny thing about the word volunteer. I thought it implied that you had personal choice about a matter. You add the letters ED to the end of it, becomes volunteer. Void of personal choice. And that is exactly what happened to me. I was volunteered by the rest of my group. I like to think that I was, because I was most Zen-like, I thought I'd be the best qualified, the best subject. But in reality, I think the true answer was much more sinister. They were just really a bunch of haters. So 5 minutes after the initial request for volunteers happened, I found myself sitting in the middle of the room, about to be barraged by a bunch of insults with a blood pressure monitor hooked to me. The good doctor then took my blood pressure. I'd like to say it was very good, aside from perhaps being a little bit high, knowing that I was just about to have my ego kind of come from here to here. And then it started. For 1 minute, before my very eyes, my friends, my peers, professional business people, transformed into a schoolyard gang. They were vicious. But my face remained composed. I didn't show any weakness. I didn't want to show them that they had the best of me. And a minute passed. I was slightly heated, but I didn't show it. The doctor then remeasured my blood pressure. And how do you think it was relative to the first test? Anyone? Right. It had skyrocketed. But nothing had physically happened. I didn't move. How the hell did my blood pressure get up so high? It was solely because of the mental stress that was placed upon my body. Now again, this is okay if it's acute, right? It happens for short periods of time. Someone yells at you, a little bit of traffic, you get out of it. But when it's chronic, it's consistent, it's financial stress, it's relational stress, it's occupational stress, it mounts and you have no release, that's when it becomes a serious matter. Now that we've addressed mental stress generally, let's look at the 3 tactics to deal with it, which are manage, mitigate, and move. Manage. There was a video that surfaced on the internet not too long ago, and it's a perfect case of traffic-related road rage gone amok. 2 cars pull into the scene, 3 guys get out of one, another guy gets out of the other, and the 3 guys proceed to beat the bejesus out of this guy. I said bejesus, right? J-E-E-Z-E-S. Out of this one guy, right? And they leave him to fend for himself. Now, the authenticity of the video is come into question, whether it was rigged or not. But the mental stress that translated into physical violence is all too commonplace. Now, when you think about Lakeshore Drive, it's a fantastic thoroughfare, non-peak hours. During peak hours, it's a complete traffic nightmare. So one method to manage, which means avoid or work around, is to plan your day around traveling at peak times. Now some of you may say, well John, that doesn't work with my schedule. I got to be at work at a certain time. And this is just one scenario. Each of you have unique lives and unique schedules. Look there and see if there's people you can avoid, situations you can avoid, and create a plan around it. Now sometimes there is no choice but to deal with a stressful situation. You can't work around it, you can't avoid it. So what do? You lessen the blow, you mitigate it. Has anyone here ever had to speak to a group before, perhaps to do a presentation, or perhaps to give a toast? Right? Hand gets a little clammy, kind of sweat around your neck like mine is right now, get a little bit nervous. It happens to the best of us. You can imagine a professional athlete before a ball game, a comedian before a show, an Illinois governor before he gets impeached. Right? Second to death, public speaking is the single most stressful situation in most people's lives. And so what do? How do you mitigate it? Well, you create a ritual. And I'll give you an example. In my own life, before every presentation, I do the following. The previous night, I make sure I get 8 hours of sleep, so I'm well rested. Next morning, I have a very good breakfast. And then I drink 1 liter of water. After that, about an hour and a half before the presentation, I go to the gym and I get 15 to 20 minutes of high-intensity exercise to flush my system, all of the stress hormone cortisol that's flowing through my system. After the gym, then I make sure I take a 2 to 3 minute ice-cold shower, right? Because that further decreases the nerves that you'll feel. Prior to the event, about 1 or 2 minutes, you'll see me on the outside of the room, sitting there, breathing deeply, and visualizing the presentation. Now these are all scientific tactics that are used independently to reduce stress. But when you combine as many as you can, what you end up doing is actually mitigating the effects of stress. Just create your own combination. And lastly, the third one, move. It doesn't require a story or any type of analogy. It's very simple. When your body is stressed, stress hormone cortisol is flowing through your system. That's what gives you the energy to do what you need to do in a stressful situation. It's basically the same energy that gives a zebra the opportunity to run away from a lion in the middle of the African Sahara so it doesn't get eaten. But in the African Sahara, the zebra eventually stops because he either stops because he dies or he stops because he gets away. But in the workplace, we have no such outlet. We run, we run, we run, we run, we run. There's no escape. If you go back to the zebra analogy, what happens if he stops running? Or if he doesn't stop running? He's going to run himself to death eventually. So the third solution is simply to move. Get the bad hormones out of your body, the bad hormone cortisol out of your body, and fill your body with a good hormone, dopamine, which will lessen the stress. So in conclusion, to wrap things up, we touched on two things. Mental stress, acute versus chronic. Acute is fine. You need that to get 7 joules of energy to do things, to survive in this world. Chronic stress is when you're at that elevated levels for a long period of time. That's the precursor to all the ailments you read about. And the 3 tactics are the following. You manage, which means avoid. You mitigate, which means you lessen the blow. And then finally you move, which means you flush your system.